Tazria, she conceived. God's trumpet call presents fourth reading from the book of Leviticus, 27th reading from Torah. Outline of Torah portion. Purification after childbirth. Leviticus chapter 12, verse 1 to verse 8. Leviticus chapter 12 discusses the purification laws for a woman after a childbirth. If a woman conceives and gives birth to a boy, she will be unclean for 7 days, with the same uncleanness as in Nida, when she is having her menstrual period. On the 8th day, the baby's foreskin is to be circumcised. She is to wait an additional 33 days to be purified from her blood. She is not to touch any holy thing or come into the sanctuary until the time of her purification is over. But if she gives birth to a girl, she will be unclean for 2 weeks, as in her Nida, and she is to wait another 66 days to be purified from her blood. When the days of her purification is over, whether for a son or for a daughter, she is to bring a lamb in its first year for a burnt offering and a young pigeon or dove for a sin offering to the entrance of the tent of meeting, to the Kohen. He will offer it before Adonai and make an atonement for her. Thus she will be purified from her discharge of blood. That is the law for a woman who gives birth, whether to a boy or to a girl. If she cannot afford a lamb, she is to take 2 doves or 2 young pigeons, one for a burnt offering and the other for a sin offering. She will be clean after Kohen makes the atonement for her. Birth of a child is wonderful and miraculous, whether it is a baby boy or a baby girl. Every childbirth indicates that God has not turned away from mankind, and his commandment, given in Genesis chapter 1, verse 28, is still in progress. Whether boy or girl, a baby is a gift from God, God's love shown on mankind, God's finest of creation, created in the image of God, with an immortal soul. God gave the commandment to be fruitful and multiply, and he did protect the woman who brings forth the next generation to the world. He had not allowed the birth of a child to be treated as something ordinary. By giving laws concerning purification after childbirth in Leviticus chapter 12, verse 1 to 8, he has set boundaries for the mother and for the child. These laws create a special status for the mother and protection for the mother and the child. Purification after childbirth. Leviticus chapter 12, verse 1 to verse 8. The Hebrew word translated as unclean is tame, and clean is tahor. A better translation of the words tame and tahor would be fit and unfit, respectively. To be ritually fit means a person is fit to enter the tabernacle, participate in the sacrificial services, and eat of the sacrifices. If a person is unfit, that person is required to refrain from eating the sacrifices or entering the tabernacle. To be ritually unfit is not a sin. It refers to a physical state of our existence. Having a child is not a sin, but it is a fulfillment of a commandment. But why did God designate a woman who gives birth as ritually unfit? There are few possible answers. The blood sacrifices of children of Israel was a symbol of purification and atonement. But the presence of blood outside the prescribed ritual was unfit and made one impure. This is why a quarantine period was given to be purified from her blood. In Genesis chapter 3, verse 16, God said to Eve, I will greatly multiply your pain in childbirth. When a woman gives birth to a child, she is under the curse spoken against Eve, the first mother. The process of conceiving and giving birth was affected by sin from the beginning, as recorded by psalmist in Psalms 51 verse 5. After childbirth, blood and bodily fluids are discharged, making a person ritually unfit. Circumcision of male child. Number of days of purification 7 plus 33. Total of 40 days. The boy was circumcised on the 8th day, fulfilling the commandment in Genesis chapter 17 verse 12. It was also a reminder of the special seed of Abraham, which would ultimately bring the Messiah. Birth of a girl, no circumcision. Days of purification 14 plus 66 days. Total of 80 days, twice the length of time. Birth of a son is special. Birth of a girl is even more important. Leviticus chapter 12 verse 2 states, if a woman conceives, the correct translation would be bear seed. This Hebrew word bear seed is found in Genesis chapter 1 verse 11 and 12 for plants bearing seed, and in Leviticus chapter 12 verse 2 concerning conception of Israelite women. It's the woman who plants the seed. She is sowing. The woman plants life. It can be understood that it's the daughters who bear the seed. Maybe purification time is doubled because it's a daughter who will bear seed in the future. Required sacrifices were the same for both boys and girls. Sin offering was brought not because she sinned, but as part of the purification ritual. Law concerning leprosy, Leviticus chapter 13 verse 1 to verse 59. The priest's main duty was to preside over the sacrifices in the liturgical worship services. In addition to these duties, they also had duties associated with the health of the community. They had to examine and make decisions on health issues that have the potential of becoming hazardous to the entire community. Instructions to the priest for diagnosing leprosy. Leviticus chapter 13 verse 1 to 8. If someone develops on his skin a swelling, a scab, or bright spot which could develop into the disease tzaraat, he is to be brought to the priest. If the hair on the sore has turned white and so goes deep into the skin, the priest will declare him unclean. If the bright spot on skin is white but does not appear to go deep into the skin and its hair not turned white, then priest is to isolate him for 7 days. Priest is to examine him on the 7th day, and the sore appears the same and has not spread, then priest will isolate him for 7 more days. And priest will re-examine him on the 7th day, and if the sore has faded and stopped spreading, priest will declare him clean. He is to wash his clothes and be clean. If the scab spreads further after the examination by the priest and declared clean by him, priest will examine him again, and if he see the scab has spread, priest will declare him unclean. Examining a swollen sore, Leviticus chapter 13 verse 9 to 11. If a person has tzaraat, he is to be brought to the priest. If he sees a white swelling in the skin and has turned the hair white and inflamed flesh in the swelling, then it is chronic leprosy. Priest will declare him unclean. He need to be isolated. Examining an outbreak over the entire body, Leviticus chapter 13 verse 12 to 17. If the leprosy has covered all his body, head to the foot, he shall pronounce him unclean. But if one day inflamed flesh appears again, he is unclean. Priest will examine inflamed flesh and declare him unclean. If the inflamed flesh turns white, he needs to be examined by the priest, and if the sore has turned white, he is declared clean. Examining a boil, ulcer on the skin. Leviticus chapter 13 verse 18 to 23. If a person has a boil that heals with white swelling or reddish white bright spot, the priest is to examine it. If it is more than skin deep and hair has turned white, then priest will pronounce him unclean. If no white hair in it and is not more than skin deep and appears fading, priest will isolate him for 7 days. If it spreads on the skin, he will be declared unclean. If it is not spreading, it's a scar on the boil, then he will be pronounced clean. Law concerning leprosy. Leviticus chapter 13 verse 1 to verse 59. Examining burns on the skin. Leviticus chapter 13 verse 24 to 28. If someone has a skin burn caused by fire and the area has become a bright spot, reddish white or white, priest is to examine it. And if the hair in the bright spot has turned white and the area is deeper than the skin around it, it's tzaraat. It has broken in the burn. If the priest find no white hair in the bright spot and it is no lower than the skin around it and looks faded, priest will isolate him for 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest will examine him. If it has spread on the skin, then priest will declare him unclean. But if the bright spot stays where it was and has not spread on the skin, but appears faded, it is a swelling due to the burn, and the priest is to declare him clean, because scar is from the burn. Examining sores on the scalp, head hair. Leviticus chapter 13 verses 29 to 37. If a man or a woman has a sore on the head or a man in his beard, the priest were to examine and judge the severity of the problem. If the sore is deeper than the skin and has yellow thin hair in it, then the priest will declare him unclean. It is a crusted area. If the priest find the crusted area not to be deeper than the skin around it, without any black hair in it, then priest is to isolate for 7 days the person infected. On the 7th day, priest is to re-examine the sore, and then if he sees that crusted area has not spread and no yellow hair in it, and crusted area is not deeper than the skin, then person is to be shaved except for the crusted area, and the priest is to isolate him for 7 more days. On the 7th day, priest is to examine the crusted area, and if he sees that it has not spread and is not deeper than the skin, priest will declare him clean. He is to wash his clothes and be clean. If the crusted area spreads after the purification, the priest sees that it has spread on the skin, he is unclean. Priest is not to look for yellow hair. If the crusted area's appearance doesn't change and black hair grows up in it, then the crusted area is healed. He is clean. Priest is to declare him clean. Examining bright spots on the skin. Leviticus chapter 13 verses 38 to 39. If a bright white spot appears on skin, the priest is to examine them. If the spots are dull white, it's only a rash that has broken out on the skin. He is clean. Examining skin associated with hair loss. Leviticus chapter 13 verses 40 to 44. If a man's hair has fallen off from his scalp, he is bald, but he is clean. If the hair fall is from the front part of his head, he is forehead bald, but he is clean. If an bald scalp or forehead, there is a reddish white sore, it is tzaraat breaking out, and priest is to examine him. If he sees that there is a reddish white swelling on his bald scalp or forehead, he is a person with tzaraat, and he is unclean. Priest must declare him unclean. Law concerning leprous garments. Results of leprosy, Leviticus chapter 13, verses 45 to 46. Everyone who has tzaraat, sores, is to wear torn clothes and unbound hair, cover his upper lip and cry, unclean, unclean. If he has sores, he will be unclean. He must live in isolation outside the camp. Diagnosing fabrics and leather contaminated by leprosy. Leviticus chapter 13, verses 47 to 52. When tzaraat infect an article of clothing, whether a woven or linen garment, on the threads, the woven in parts of either linen or wool, or on a hide or item made of leather, then if the stain in the garment is greenish or reddish, it is an infection of tzaraat and is to be shown to the priest. Priest must examine the article and isolate infected article for 7 days. If the infection has spread, then infection is a contagious tzaraat and the garment is unclean. Article must be burnt up completely. Garments that can be washed and preserved. Leviticus chapter 13, verse 53 to 59. If the infection has not spread on the garment, then priest is to order that the article having the infection be washed and isolate it for 7 more days. Priest is to examine the stain after it has been washed. If the stain has not changed the color, then even though it has not spread, it is unclean. Article must be burned completely. If the stain has faded after being washed, then he is to tear the stain out of the garment. If it appears again in the garment, it is contagious and it is to be burned completely. If the infection is gone from the garment or from the item, then it is to be washed a second time and it will be clean. This is the law concerning infectious tzaraat in garments or leather items, and when to declare it clean and when to declare it unclean. The sin of evil speech. Traditional opinion regarding tzaraat is that it is not a normal physical disease, but a type of a divine punishment for evil speech. There is biblical support for this idea because of what happened to Miriam, Moshe's sister, King Uzziah, and Gehazi. Leviticus chapter 13 discusses the condition known as tzaraat, which is translated to English as leprosy. Leprosy is not identical to tzaraat, the condition mentioned in the Bible. Only the temple priests were trained to diagnose the condition known as tzaraat. It wasn't a communicable disease, but the isolation was prescribed because it made the person having tzaraat unfit. They were isolated because their unfitness was communicable. The most famous person infected with tzaraat was Miriam, Moshe's sister, who was struck with tzaraat after she criticized Moshe behind his back. Uzziah, king of Judah, considering what he has accomplished for God, assumed that he could enter the Holy of Holies. Priests warned him not to enter the sacred place, yet he disregarded the explicit commandment that only the priest will enter the Holy of Holies, and only the high priest can enter the most holy place. God immediately struck Uzziah down with tzaraat for the rest of his life. Gehazi, Elisha's servant, took the opportunity to steal money and clothes from Naaman, the Assyrian general. Gehazi used deceit to gain the upper hand, but Elisha took Naaman's tzaraat and placed it on Gehazi as a punishment for his greed. Apostle James, in James chapter 3, verse 1 to 18, teach us to guard our tongues. Arrogance and pride started in Miriam, Uzziah, and Gehazi's heart, came out as words and turned into action. tzaraat separated them from the rest of the community. God struck a gossiper or slanderer, and that was to stop discontent among the community. We need to discipline ourselves to think and speak good of others, so that evil speech will not come out of our mouth,